Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Vicarage here at Penn on this Friday morning, on this overcast but blissfully slightly cooler morning. Lovely to see you. Hope you're well and cheerful, and welcome to our Bible talk for today. As it's Friday, may I remind you, we are open for business as a church, and we'd love to see you if you are free this weekend. We'd love to see you either online. We have our 10 o'clock at St Bart's and 11:45 St Anne's services on live streamed. Otherwise, just come and join us. We'd love to see you, and we'd be a better congregation with you in it. So if you are free, we'd love to see you, and you would be very, very welcome. So, to our Bible talk for today. I think if we're honest with ourselves, we all struggle with issues sometimes, don't we? It could be something like problems, suffering in the world, or badness going on in the world, or it could be what about other religions, or whatever it may be. We all think we all have forgiveness, or whatever it will be. We all have issues that we struggle with. And I think for Paul, probably his biggest issue, I think really, was what about the Jews? He had been a Jew, and he'd met Jesus, but many of his friends in Judaism hadn't met Jesus and weren't convinced and so on. And what about them? And so in Romans 9 to 11, we get like a letter within a letter. We hear Paul agonizing about what about the Jews and God and salvation, and so what about the Jews? And he asks questions like, is God not just anymore? Has the word of God failed? Or yesterday it was, has God given up on the Jews? And he's agonizing. And here we have the last one of these today. So we're looking at Romans 11, and I'm starting to read at verse 11. I'll read to the end of the chapter. So I ask, have they stumbled so as to fall? By no means, but through their stumbling, salvation has come to the Gentiles, so as to make Israel jealous. Now, if their stumbling means jealous for the world, means riches for the world, and if their defeat means riches for the Gentiles, how much more will their full inclusion mean? Now, I'm speaking to you Gentiles. Inasmuch then as I'm an apostle to the Gentiles, I glorify my ministry in order to make my own people jealous and thus save some of them. For if their rejection is this reconciliation of the world, what will their acceptance be but life from the dead? If the part of the dough offered as the first fruits is holy, then the whole batch is holy. And if the root is holy, then the branches also are holy. But if some of the branches were broken off, and you, a wild olive shoot, were grafted into their place to share in the rich root of the olive tree, do not boast over the branches. But if you do boast, remember that it's not you that supports the root, but the root that supports you. You will say, branches were broken off that I might be grafted in. That is true. They were broken off because of their unbelief. But if you stand only through faith, but you stand only through faith. So do not become proud, but stand in awe. For if God did not spare the natural branches, perhaps he will not spare you. Note then the kindness and severity of God. Severity towards those who've fallen, but God's kindness towards you, provided you continue in his kindness. Otherwise you also will be cut off. And even those of Israel, if they do not persist in unbelief, will be grafted in. For God has the power to graft them in again. For if you have been cut from what is by nature a wild olive tree and grafted contrary to nature into a cultivated olive tree, how much more will those natural branches be grafted back into their own olive tree? So that you may not claim to be wiser than you are, brothers and sisters, I want you to understand this mystery. A hardening has come upon part of Israel, until the full number of the Gentiles has come in, and so all Israel will be saved. As it is written, out of Zion will come the deliverer, and he will banish ungodliness from Jacob. And this is my covenant with them when I take away their sins. As regards the gospel, they are enemies of God for your sake. But as regards election, they are beloved for the sake of their ancestors. For the gifts and the calling of God are irrevocable. Just as you were once disobedient to God, but you have now received mercy because of their disobedience. So they have now been disobedient in order that, by the mercy shown to you, they too may now receive mercy. For God has imprisoned all in disobedience, so that he may be merciful to all. Oh, the depth of the riches of the wisdom and the knowledge of God! How unsearchable are his judgments, and how inscrutable his ways! For who has known the mind of the Lord, or who has been his counselor, or who has given a gift to him to receive a gift in return? For from him and through him and to him are all things. To him be glory forever. Amen. And this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. So the question Paul's asking here really is, the Jewish people, many of them have fallen away through disobedience. And the question is, have they kind of gone forever? Is there any way back for them? It says here, have they stumbled so as to fall? What it means is this falling permanent? And Paul says clearly it isn't. And he uses the image or the picture of an olive branch. And what he's saying is, originally there was this great olive tree, and God is the tree, and the Jewish people were God's people, and they were like the branches on it. And what he's saying is that because of their unbelief, they've fallen off. But he gives two bits of really good news. The first thing he says is, because they've fallen off, we, who are not Jewish, we've been grafted on. So in other words, because they were disobedient, because of their hardness of heart, there is room for us, and we have been welcomed in. And that is good news. But with that, he does give a bit of a warning to us as well. He says, because you are on there, there's no room for anti-Semitism. You can't look down proudly on the Jews. Remember, you're only there because of their disobedience. And remember, you're there. It's a massive privilege. No one has the right to be there. We're there because God's called us. And we must make sure that having got salvation, that we keep it. That we can't use it as an opportunity to be lazy or relaxed or take the love of God for granted. We need to remember that we're only there because we've been grafted on. And therefore, we need to take that responsibility seriously. So the first bit of good news is that because they dropped off, there's room for us, and because we, the Gentiles, the rest of the world, we can be grafted on too. But with that comes the warning to remember that it's a privilege to be there. None of us deserves to be there. We've been rooted on because they've come off. So there's been room for us to make sure we take our responsibility seriously. But the second thing Paul is quite clear about is that there is room back for the Jews. And he's quite clear that this falling off is not permanent. They've not fallen in such a way as they can't come back. In fact, what he says is there is room. They clearly can be. Read what he says. They clearly can be grafted back. And what he says also is what he's hoping is that the salvation that we have enjoyed, the freedom, the forgiveness, the peace, the love, I could go on and on. His hope is that it'll make the Jews jealous and make them want to come back and come back onto the planet again. So the good news for them is there is room back. There is always a way back with God. They can always be grafted back onto the planet again. And his hope and his prayer is that the salvation that he and the Gentiles are enjoying will make the Jewish people jealous and want to come back into the way of God again. So, two bits of good news, all right? Okay. Firstly, because the Jews are, so to speak, going about it the wrong way, there's been room so the rest of the world, people like us, can be grafted on. And that's brilliant, because it means that we can enjoy salvation. It's not just for those born of Abraham, so to speak. We can be grafted on, and we can enjoy the salvation, the forgiveness, the love of God too. But we need to remember that that's a responsibility, and we can't take that for granted. And to make sure that we hang on to the plan with all our hearts. But secondly, there is a way back for the Jews. They clearly can be grafted back. Paul is quite clear about that. And his hope and his prayer is that they would be jealous of what they see in the salvation other people enjoy and want to come enjoy it themselves. But I think the third thing to say really, as we come to the end of this vignette, this letter within a letter, this Romans 9 to 11, Paul's agonizing, is I mentioned a few minutes ago that we all agonize and we all struggle with bits, aspects of the Christian faith. You know, it could be, as used to say, with forgiveness or something to do with, suffering in the world or other religions or whatever it may be. And it's different for all of us. And that in life we have to, like Paul, work these things through. But what I think is interesting at the end is Paul has clearly spent a lot of time thinking about this. He clearly has been agonizing and struggling with what about his people? What about the people he's brought up with? What about his friends and his family and the people he sat at Gamaliel's feet with and Gamaliel and all that sort of stuff? What about the Jews? It's clearly very important to him. But having worked it through, and I think, as I say, we all have these things that we agonize with. He comes to an incredible conclusion at the end, and he ends up by saying, "Oh, the depth of the riches and the wisdom and the knowledge of God! How inscrutable are his judgments, and how unsearchable are his judgments, and how inscrutable his ways." He's basically saying, "What a fantastic God we have." He's worked it through. He's still working it through, but he comes to the conclusion, having thought it all through. Wow, what a fantastic God we have! And actually, as I say, we all have times in our lives when we have to work things through, and some answers to some things we won't know until we get to heaven. But I think we can recognise, and faith tells us, that even if we don't understand things, God does. And even if our own small intellect, or my small intellect, can't always get my head around everything, we have a God who can. And that, oh, the depth of the riches and the wisdom and the knowledge of God. And even though we have things that we don't understand, we can be sure that God knows what he's doing, that he's got it and he's with us, and we can enjoy his wisdom. And even whether, say, the things that we don't understand, we can take comfort in the fact that God does. God bless you. Have a lovely weekend. I'll see you. If I don't see you at the weekend of the worship, I'll see you on